Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the webinar on the first Innovation Fund call for small-scale projects. My name is Mark van der Hagen from the Innovation and Networks Executive Agency. I'm the head of unit in this agency responsible for program support, coordination, and communication. Now, this webinar is organized jointly by INEA and by the European Commission, DG CLIMA. The respective roles of our organizations in the Innovation Fund is the following. The DG CLIMA, the Commission, is responsible for organizing the legal framework, for coordination with the European Investment Bank, for defining the priorities and the budget of the call, whilst INEA is responsible for the implementation of the call with respect to the evaluation, organizing support to applicants and information to applicants. We also do the evaluations, we prepare the grant agreements, and then once the grant agreements are signed, we are also following, monitoring from a financial and operational perspective, the projects. The projects are decided by the Commission, by DG CLIMA. Now, this webinar is web streamed and recorded, and after the webinar, you will receive the recording as well as the presentations. They will be accessible from our internet page. This webinar, in fact, is for you who are interested in participating in this small-scale call of the Innovation Fund. You will learn here everything that you need to know to prepare good quality proposals by the call deadline, which is the 10th of March of next year. In terms of the agenda, after my welcoming words, I will pass the floor to Christian Holzleitner. He will introduce the small-scale call, and he's the keynote speaker of this webinar. Then we will have a short question and answer. After that, I will come back and present the application and selection procedures, also followed by the possibility to answer your questions. And then, finally, the colleagues from DG CLIMA, Marion Perel and Maria Velkova, will present the award criteria, again followed by a question and answer session. And then we will be ready to close, and it will be again Christian Holzleitner who will close the event. Now, I would like to ask you to send already your questions that you have during the presentations. You can see it on through the Slido, so you connect to Slido to submit your questions. You take out your smartphone, tablet or computer, you open your browser, you go to slido.com, and you use the event code IFSS from Innovation Fund Small Scale Call. So you can there post your, you can also post your comments or like questions from others. And please also identify when posting comments, the identified questions will get priority for the replies. Now, I would like to say that this is the second call we organize under the Innovation Fund. For the large-scale call, the first call, we received 311 applications, which was a huge success. But I'm sure we can do even better for the small-scale call. So I'm very much looking forward and counting on you to see a large number of very good proposals. Now, before giving the floor to Christian, I would already also like to announce now that at the end of the seminar, we will ask your feedback. This will also happen through Slido, so please before leaving the webinar, reply to a very short questionnaire so that we have your input helping us to improve for the next round. And now I would like to give the floor to our keynote speaker, Christian Holzleitner from DG CLIMA. He is the head of unit who is responsible for land use and finance for innovation. Christian, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thanks very much, Mark, for the good introduction. I'm very happy to be here and to give you a little introduction into now our first call for small-scale projects. The Innovation Fund. What is our objective? We have one objective, and this is to get to a climate-neutral Europe in 2050. So this means, on balance, we don't want to emit any more greenhouse gases in 2050. So we need to move out the fossil fuels and move in all the clean technologies. And the good news is we know how they work. We know how renewables work. We know how carbon capture and storage works. We know how hydrogen works, how storage works. But what we are anxious about is to bring these technologies to the market. So that we already show in the 2020s, 2030s, these technologies work. And the Innovation Fund is here to make those technologies a good business for you, so that you are ready to invest now and that Europe can take the technological leadership in these technologies of the future. So, and there, as you know, there are a lot of clean tech solutions around, and we are ready to support all of them. Take the renewables. We still expect there can be substantial cost reductions, up to a third. Efficiency can increase still a lot. We have carbon capture and storage. If you think about a 2050 economy, we will not have any more fossil fuels, but we still need CO2 for certain industrial processes. So, like in the chemicals, we can make like garments out of CO2, out of biomass. So we must get much better at capturing CO2, be it from biomass, be it through direct air capture, and then reusing this CO2 and finally storing it. So this is like what the circular economy is about. And talking about circular economy, I'm immediately with the energy-intensive industries. And there are so many solutions that you can do to decarbonize energy-intensive processes. Electrification of heat, using hydrogen as a feedstock, using biomass as a feedstock, the electrification of heat, and so on. And finally, it's about the storage of energy. There's such a huge potential in batteries, but also in other solutions of storage, like hydrogen, storage of heat. And this is what we are here for, to support your investments in these technologies. So on the next slide, I want to present you the main features now of our call for small-scale projects. So we are offering a volume of 100 million euros for grants. And in addition, we offer project development assistance. And this project development assistance will be provided by the European Investment Bank. So I think the best address in Europe for project development assistance in those technologies that we talk about. Then, which size of projects do we target? So what do we understand as a small scale? We target projects with capital expenditure between 2.5 million euros and 7.5 million euros. Why this range? The 7.5 million euros comes from our legal base. So that has been decided together with stakeholders and member states. The lower range, 2.5 million euros, is we looked at other programs. in the EU, like the European Innovation Council, like the LIFE program. These are programs that are financing or targeting similar projects as us. And when we look at the average project size in those programs, it's around 1.5, 2 million euros. So we wanted to be complementary and start at 2.5 million euros. So also to give a clear picture to you out there, so to understand which programs fits you best. In terms of eligible sectors, you've seen the slide before. We are very open. We want to encourage almost every kind of clean tech. And how much money can you get from us? This is 60% of your total capital expenditure. So if you have like the maximum project size of 7.5 million euros, it's 4.5 million euros that we can finance. As you know, the call was opened last week, 1st of December, and it's open for your applications until 10th of March. So, what is now the specific focus of the Innovation Fund? What do we want in particular, or how do we want to behave as when evaluating the projects, when following up the projects? So basically, we want to behave as any other private investor. With the only difference is that we don't want to have a monetary return, but we want to see these emission savings coming on. So we want to see those technologies on the market saving emissions, emitting zero emissions, or even going into what we call negative emissions, so removing carbon from the atmosphere. And why do we want to behave like a private investor? Because those projects that we finance must succeed on the market, and they need additional financing. While we are ready to kind of lose a part of our money, we must be sure that the project, given our support, works on the market. So, and as you see, if you look at the award criteria here, we take quite a comprehensive view on the project as a private investor. We want to know, is this a good thing? Is this innovative? Has this a market potential towards 2050? Because this is what we are believing in, the climate neutrality in 2050. But on the other hand is also, are you ready to go? Is your project mature enough in terms of, do you have all permits? Do you have the financing? And so on. So I'll explain that in a bit more detail on one of the next slides. But also, if you can just go back once more, thanks. But also in the way that we distribute the grant, is we're also adopting a very result-oriented approach. So also as a private investor, we want to follow up with you through the project phases. So we will look at financial close together with you. Can we go ahead with this project? And we are ready to put in the money. But then you will only get the full grant if we see, once you are in operation, that you are really delivering these emission savings. And if it's not happening, we are ready to walk away and to invest in another project. So, as I've already emphasized several times, we are close to the market. So we want to support you when you, for the first time, bring a new innovative solution to the market. So one kind of situation could be you are negotiating with a customer, you are offering quite a new innovative solution, but the customer is, your client is still a bit hesitant. So on the next slide, this is what we termed a little bit like a pioneer customer. So here we could help you to convince your customer to go for that solution, because we can take out a bit the risk by financing 60% of the capital expenditure. So if you think of like installing a battery for the first time with a customer's an innovative solution. Maybe you are negotiating with a public authority and you have an innovative idea how to build like a public building with innovative construction materials, with wooden construction materials that are of course more expensive, but save much more CO2. We could be there to support you. And we would be very open how you set up the project. So do you apply on your own, or maybe you form a consortium with your customers. So whatever you want to do here, we are very open. We would follow that, what would make the most business sense for you. Okay, and on the next slide, I run you quickly through the award criteria, but you will then get from my colleagues a really deep dive into them. But to give the overview, so what we first look at is how innovative is the project. We are not interested in incremental innovation. We are not interested in just improving the process a bit, like by 5% or something like this, to increase the efficiency or reduce the emissions. We really would like to go towards a breakthrough technologies, so completely clean technologies, or as I said, even technologies that can take CO2 out of the atmosphere. We will encourage in particular 3 activities in this sense, so direct air capture, substitute products, as well as negative emission technologies. Because we think they are still a bit more expensive, and so this is why we would give a little bit of a nod to them. But don't get me wrong, we are very happy to take all technologies, and we are very open here. The second one, it's the important one, is we want to know how many emissions will you save, will you reduce with your new technology. Because this is also what you then have to deliver during the operating period, what we will monitor together. The third one, as I said, is the project maturity. Are you ready to go? Do you already have a memorandum of understanding with your customer? Have you got your finances sorted? Do you have all permits ready, and so on? And why do we put also so much emphasis on this? Because you have to see is that we want to do yearly calls, also for the small-scale projects, in the same way as for the large-scale project. So we want to privilege, like in this call, those projects that are most ready. If you have an innovative idea, but it still takes you a bit of time, we can offer you project development assistance, and you can come back for a call later on. But we want to be sure is if we give you our money, that you really can go quickly ahead. Scalability, it's about the market potential. So how many future applications are there for your solution? But also a bit, how can you help us to kick off European value chains in these clean technologies? Maybe also at the regional level. For example, if you look at hydrogen, maybe there's an innovative solution how you can produce hydrogen, use it both for industry and public transport. So that could be a nice application here, also I think for the call for small-scale projects. And lastly, we also want to look at the cost efficiency. So this means how much money do you want from us per ton of CO2 avoided? And if you have a closer look at our award criteria here and how we want to evaluate them compared to our call for large-scale projects, you will discover several significant simplifications. And the most significant one is with the cost efficiency, because we just take 60% of the capital expenditure and not this more sophisticated calculation as under the large-scale call of additional costs, so the difference between your unit costs and the market price. Okay, then quickly a word on how do we distribute the grant. And also here, compared to other EU programs, we take a bit of a different approach. So we can give 40% of our awarded grant at financial close. So this means we look together with you, maybe with other investors, with your bank. Is this project going ahead? And if we're all fine with that, we put in our money. But if we see that like after 3-4 years, we are still not getting to financial close, as I said, we would be very ready to walk away. The remaining 60% of our grant depend on your performance. So they really depend that you deliver at least 75% of the emission avoidance that you promised us before. Otherwise, you will not get the full grant. So there are several possibilities. So either we just pay upon delivery during the operating period, which for a small-scale project should be 3 years, and then upon delivery you get the money. Or maybe you want to have already some shares of this money during construction. That's also possible. But then be very well aware, if you don't deliver afterwards, we want to claim back that. So again, this is very result-oriented and not cost-oriented. So also a difference to like the Horizon programs. Okay, then on the next slide, very quickly on how we want to, or how we will select a project, how INEA will organize this. We have a single stage selection process. This is quite similar to what you may know from Horizon. We have our independent experts there looking at the proposals. Then we pre-consult the list of projects with the member states. And then there are 2 positive outcomes. The one is we offer you the grant. The other one is we offer you project development assistance. And if you don't make it in this call, you can always apply in a further one. So maybe let me say still a few words about the project development assistance on the next slide. As I said, we cooperate here with the European Investment Bank. That is also supporting us for the call for large-scale projects. So, and they are really building up a dedicated team. They have a lot of experience with clean technologies. So if we consider your project is really good on innovation, on scalability, but not yet there in terms of the project maturity, we pass it on to the EIB. The EIB will also have a look at that, at your proposal. And then we can, I think, offer, I would guess, for about 20 projects, this project development assistance, and that will be completely run by the European Investment Bank. Okay, I think I got for my main points of substance. Now I have 2 more points left. The first one is on the next slide, the timing, to recall you that. We launched the call. We are doing our first webinar today. Also a bit based on your reactions today on Slido, we will consider whether more webinars are useful in 21 or whether you're already completely on it and on our methodologies. Then the deadline is 10th of March for the submission of your proposals. And then we would hope to be able to inform you in August next year about the results. And now a very final slide from me. If you've seen more presentations by me, you will know what I'm always saying at the end is we not only want to have good projects, but we also want to have good evaluators. And we really want to create like a community around the Innovation Fund. I think it's so important that we also all understand better how those projects can be evaluated. And as Mark said, we have more than 300 projects for the large-scale call. So our evaluators are already busy looking at them. And what I understand, they also have a lot of fun at looking at very interesting proposals. But we need also all of these evaluators then for the call for small-scale projects. So please activate your networks if you know colleagues that would be interested in doing this. As I said, I think it's a very rewarding, it's a very interesting opportunity for you also to get an overview on what is out there in clean tech and to help us evaluate these projects and also to drive forward how we can do evaluation for clean tech. So please consider to apply with INEA. If you have any questions, our colleagues at INEA are very happy to help you further. Okay, that's for me. That's my introduction. As I understand, I will now pass back to Mark. No, yes, right. We do first question and answers. Sorry, I'm a bit confused.
Good morning, everyone. Now is the time to look into the questions that we have been getting on Slido. Thank you very much for the active participation. It is literally pouring questions, which shows the interest in this call, and we are very happy about it. First, the service announcement. The slides and the video will be made available online, so do not worry if you don't catch a detail. You can watch it calmly and think about it. Then, secondly, how are we going to run Slido and the interaction with the audience? We try to answer as many questions as we can, and we try to choose questions which can help a maximum number of applicants. So the ones that have been the most upvoted and the ones that are more horizontal as content. More specific questions about concrete eligibility of your project, or how should you calculate the costs for your project or the emissions, etc. The answer to these are better found either in the code text, so this is the first point of reference, or in the frequently asked questions, which will be published on the Funding and Tenders portal already this week. Or, if not, you can submit a question to the help desk. The link is on the Funding and Tenders portal. This is the way that you're guaranteed to receive an answer. We strive to reply as quickly as we can. We get many questions, and they are quite complex. They require some thinking and work on our side. So we generally try to reply within 2 weeks. So if you don't get an answer the next day, do not worry. Your question is received and being treated. Now, back to Slido. I would start first with some general questions about eligibility and the general features of the call. First, can we clarify what is the technology readiness level for the small-scale call?
Yes, this is also maybe a little bit of specificity of ours. We don't care so much about the technology readiness level. We want that it works on the market. So it's for the first time that you demonstrate a new technology and you deliver it on the market. And you can stay with your technology, with your product on the market for 3-10 years until the 2030s. And then we would hope that the market conditions are such that that can be carried further. So clearly, we are very in higher TRLs, but we have no specific requirements on that. What we want is a new solution that is for the first time coming to the market.
Great. Thank you very much for the answer. Another question which we get in different forms is what member states are projects in which member states are eligible to apply? What are the requirements from consortia? Can you have applications for projects in the same member state?
Yes. So what we are looking at is that the project is happening in the EU, in the 27 member states, or in Norway or in Iceland. So why do we add Norway and Iceland? It's because they are also part of our emission trading system. And the Innovation Fund call is financed from the revenues of our emission trading system. So this is why it's also Norway and Iceland. But if you are like a Swiss company and you do a project in Denmark, that's fully okay for us. It's about that it happens within the EU, Norway, and Iceland, and that the emission avoidance happens there. We are open to single beneficiaries, and I think this is like maybe even our main case. But we are equally open to consortia. So as I said before, like this idea that we presented of a pioneer customer. So maybe the technology provider teams up with the customer, and they come to us with a joint proposal. But it's equally possible that either the customer or the technology provider comes to us and asks for the grant, and then everything else, it's for you how to organize. As I said, we are very open on this. We've seen very different approaches already with the call for large-scale projects. So it's mostly what fits your business.
Thank you. There are plenty of questions, but let's try to answer some which have to do with the eligibility of sectors. So there is a question if the production of substitute building materials is within the call scope, as was in the first presentation published after our event on the 19th of November.
What you always have to think about is that you need to prove the emission avoidance. So, and therefore I think this idea of teaming up with a customer is a good one, because then you can track the emission avoidance. So we are open also to the manufacturing of wooden construction material, substitute materials, of course, but then you need to prove us that you really sell what you produce, and that it's used, and that the emission avoidance is happening. So you are responsible for this.
Yes, thank you very much. Maybe we take one last question in view of time. And it concerns whether we only target the producers of renewable energy or also business models that use and provide green energy.
Of course. And I think there could be very nice projects. If you are like a small a community, a small city, and you have an idea of becoming energy independent, like, or you want to be like a zero emission community, or if you look at like a quarter in a city, you have a good idea on how to store, how to produce your own energy, how to store it, how to use it. So energy efficiency, demand side solutions. Yes, we are very much open to this.
Yes, thank you very much. In view of time, I would suggest that we move swiftly to Mark's presentation, and I think many of the questions will be answered in it or in the subsequent presentation on the award criteria. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so, good morning to the ones that I would say may have come in a bit later. I will present to you now in my presentation where you can find the portal to submit your proposal, how to apply for the Innovation Fund Small Scale Call, which forms you have to fill in, how you can, in which way to submit your proposal in the portal, and also where to find more help if you would need that. So first, on where to find the Innovation Fund. Now, the call is published along with many other EU funding programs in the funding and tenders portal. This, under the new multi-annual framework, a whole range of new programs will come under this umbrella of the funding and tenders portal, which is great from the perspective of the synergies between the programs. And already now you will see that a lot of programs are published there. And just to show you the power of this, if you type into the search bar, you type the word hydrogen, for instance, you will see immediately all the programs that support hydrogen solutions, programs that supported them in the past, but also in the future. And of course, you will also find the Innovation Fund calls thereunder. You also see on this slide the internet address where you can find the Innovation and Tenders portal, but of course you can also just Google it. Now, this is the homepage of the Funding and Tenders portal, and in order to find the fund, you scroll down to the very last page where you find the Innovation Fund on the bottom of the program. By clicking on this, you will, in fact, come to the landing page of the Innovation Fund. So here we are. Just search, in fact, just click on the magnifying glass to find the different calls which you can find, which are available under the Innovation Fund. So there are two calls, one closed, which is the large-scale call, and one call which is open, the call on which we have the webinar now, which is the small-scale projects call. Now, to click on this, you come to the landing page of the call, and from here, in fact, you can access all the operations that you need in order to prepare, to submit, and also to follow your application. On the left-hand side of the screen, you will see a number of clickable tabs, which I will explain you. So first of all, you have a number of tabs that give you some general information about the call and on possible future updates that we will do on the call. So always keep an eye on this. So let's then move to the tab Conditions and Documents, which is the most important section of this call page, as it contains, in fact, all the relevant documents that you should read before starting the submission. Now, the most important document is, in fact, the call document, but you can also have a close look at the application form B before starting to prepare your application, as it contains the instructions on the information that you should provide. And there's also, you will find also here the methodology for the calculation of greenhouse gas emission avoidance. And this is a mandatory methodology to be used for calculating the savings of greenhouse gas emission by your project. There will also be a greenhouse gas emission calculator tool that will be soon available. It is not mandatory, but highly recommended to use. And on this page, you find also additional useful reference documents, in particular the model grant agreement that will help you understand how the projects will be supported if they are selected by the Commission. And last but not least, you find also on this page information on how to find additional information, answering your questions. For instance, the section on frequently asked questions can also be accessed from here, and also the access to the call help desks comes from here, but I will come back later on this during my presentation. So once you have a good understanding of the call conditions and of what information you are expected to provide, you can start, in fact, creating your proposals. And for that, you just need 2 clicks here, indicating the type of action, and then clicking on the Start Submission button. In order to create your proposal, you will need what we call an EU login account. If you have one already, use it with your credentials. If you don't have one, you will be asked to create one on the fly. So now on this slide, you see an overview of, in fact, the 6 steps of the submission cycle. So the 6 steps that you need to perform in order to submit your proposal. You need to create your proposal. You will need to set up the consortium. You will need to upload the forms and the annexes in the portal. You will also need to complete the proposal as regards administrative data, and then you will submit your proposal. Now, what I wanted, in fact, to explain you here, that after submission, it's always possible, as long as you are before the deadline, to go back to your proposal, to change it, to update it, and to resubmit it. And it is even something that we recommend, because don't wait until the last minute to submit your proposal. You can have some issues with submitting at the very last moment, and once the deadline is passed, it will not be possible anymore to submit your proposal. So do play around with the system. It's safe if you submit something which is not final, no problem. You can always change it and resubmit. But do remember that a change that you have made and which is not submitted will not be evaluated. So make sure that you always submit the last changes before the deadline of the call. Once submitted, you can also retrieve your proposal from the My Proposals screen, which you will see once you have logged in into the portal with your EU account credentials. So now we move to the steps to create your proposals, and after you have logged in the portal and after you have also chosen the call to which you will apply, which are the first 2 steps, we are now in the 3rd step, which is the creation of your proposal. Now, this is a task that cannot be interrupted. If you stop, you will need to come back and create it again. So first, you need to register your organization and obtain a participant identification code, a PIC code. If you have used the submission system previously, you will have already a PIC and it will be presented to you, so you can just use the references of your PIC and you can use just that. If not, you will have also a search facility where, if you are not sure to have a PIC, you can look with the name of your organization to see if you or maybe somebody else already has created a PIC for your organization. So if you do a search, then you will see the most relevant possible codes that may correspond to your organization, and if you find the right one, you just click on it in order to select it. If you still don't find your participant identification code, then you can also create one and register on the fly. If you have chosen your participant identification code, now you can complete the rest of the information, indicate whether you are the main contact or not. Now, each participating organization can have multiple contacts, but you need to have a main contact. And also, you need to give to your proposal a meaningful acronym and also provide a short summary of the proposal. Now, this information is then also duplicated in the application form part A. And now you can draft your proposal, and you will be able to leave the system. This proposal, this information will remain. So now we go to the next step, which is the building of a consortium. It's not necessary. It can be a single beneficiary proposal. In that case, you don't need this step. But if you want to create a consortium, you can do so through this page. So in the same way as I explained for yourself, you can select your partners using the participant identification code. You can add contact details for the partners. And when you have added a partner to your consortium, you will also be need to give an email address. And this is important, as it should be the email address with which your partner has used for its EU login. So once you have done that, then an invitation email will be sent to the email address indicated, and the proposal will be linked to that particular EU login account of your partner in the consortium. If this applicant does not have an EU login, then an email will provide this to the partner. Now, the members of the consortium can view the whole proposal, and if allowed by the coordinator, they can also update their organization details. Now, the role of each partner needs to be specified here. So you can have subcontractors, you can have affiliated entities, associated partners, or full partners. And it's in fact up to you to decide how you want to structure your consortium. We can we see that, for instance, a single beneficiary project with a group of entities in a subcontractor can be a very valid way to go ahead, but you can also include partners in your consortium, and this is equally fine for us. It is, what is important is the solidity of the team, and this will be assessed under the maturity criteria. Now, in case you choose for a consortium, you will also need to keep in mind that you will need to sign a consortium agreement at, before in the framework of the grant agreement preparations. So your consortium is created. So now we go to the next step, which is editing your proposal and uploading the annexes. So in this step, you can upload the completed application form part B, you can upload your completed annexes, and you can also edit the online application form part A. Now you have to know that if you make changes in the consortium in the previous step, you will also need to reflect that in this step. So first, the application form part B includes the substance, in fact, of your application. The template can be downloaded. You see on the left side of the screen from where you can do it. And this is the template you have to use. Fill it in, complete it, and finally upload it again in this screen. You also have to reproduce some administrative information about the project from part A in here, and again, make sure that you are consistent between part A and part B. Now, along with the completed part B form, you can also update all the necessary annexes and upload, all the necessary annexes and the supporting document. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you see a number of red X's, and this indicates that a mandatory annex is missing. If you don't provide it, you will not be able to submit your applications. So, and remind for the annexes, there is a maximum limit in number of pages. So it's maximum 70 pages for the application form part B, 100 pages for the feasibility study and the business plan combined, and 20 pages for the profiles and the list of projects taken together. Now, these are maximums. It's not the target. Because remember, evaluators like clear and concise proposals. Now, if you upload a document which would go over these limits, then you will be shown a warning. So you will still be able to submit your application, but be aware, all the pages that go over the limit will be blanked out, will not be seen by the evaluators. So we really advise you not to go into this territory. Now, also you can upload other supporting documents, including the due diligence. If you have it, it is definitely an added value to link it to your proposal, but it is not a mandatory document. So let's now go to the part A, which is in structured form, application form part A. It's also still part of this step of completing your proposal. And it is not downloadable. You have to introduce it immediately into the system. And it is more administrative information about your projects that you put in here, including also information about the members of the consortium. Now, some of the fields of this application form are mandatory, and if they are not filled in, again, you will not be able to submit your application. So let's go a bit into detail, and here you see you need to select the sector. So make sure that you select your sector. You can do it from the fixed keywords 1 tab, and we know it's technically possible to select more than one sector, but you should not do that. Select one sector and associate it to your proposal. That is very, very important. Then you will also be able to submit a number of declarations. Then you will also have the possibility to complete your administrative, some administrative data from the participating organization, and you have to do that, in fact, for each participant. This can also be edited by the participants themselves if the coordinator allows it. Now, again, when you change the consortium, you also need to make the changes here in the form on the composition of your consortium. Here, you also will need to provide your budget information, which of course need to be consistent with the information that you provide in application form part B. And then you will also need to choose the member state where the project will be implemented. Christian already mentioned that. It is an important information because it is an eligibility condition. Projects which are located in the UK are eligible only insofar as this is provided for by an international agreement between the EU and the United Kingdom. So then, if you have to click on Validate Form to see, in fact, the overview of information that you have provided, when you see lots of red, it means that you will have errors that will block your submission, and this needs to be remediated. Warning in orange will allow you to proceed with submission, but they can create eligibility issues. So it's definitely recommended to also resolve these. So now we are ready to submit your, you are ready to submit your proposal when everything is completed. And if you have, in fact, if you have any error conditions, you will not be able to submit your proposal. So then you see this kind of screen, and you will be led to the page that allows you to go to the place in your proposal where the error is occurred, and you can correct it from there. When everything is fine with your proposal, you will see this screen, and when your proposal is then finally submitted, you will also receive a confirmation with a project ID. Of course, your proposal is not yet a project, but that will be the ID that will be used if your project is successful. You will receive an email confirming the submission, and after the submission, you can, as I indicated, re-edit your proposal and resubmit as many times as you like prior to the call deadline. You can also withdraw your application anytime prior also to the call deadline. But after the call deadline, this submit button will not be active anymore, and late submissions will not be accepted when 5 o'clock, 10 March in the afternoon is the sharp limit, and after that you can do no changes anymore to your proposal. You can then access your proposal from the My Proposal screen in the portal, which of course you can only access if you have connected with your EU credentials. You have to click on Actions in order to reopen your proposal. So if you need help, I recommend maybe first to read the How to Participate section in the portal. You see it on the top of the screen here. You can also take a look at the frequently asked questions. I indicated earlier in my presentation how to access that. And if you still have questions, you can go to the support section to be sure to select, of course, the Innovation Fund so that you are directed to the right help desk. And here you see the different support services. First of all, there is an IT help desk, which is available on business hours from 8 in the morning to 8 in the evening. The email address and the telephone number is always seen on the Funding and Tenders portal. The people in the help desk are very nice people. They are very experienced, so don't hesitate to contact them. And if you would experience an IT problem on the day of the deadline of the call, please call them to make sure that all technical issues are timely resolved. Then, if you have a more content-related question, you can contact the Innovation Fund help desk. There you will be directed to the colleagues of INEA, which will help you with any content-related questions. Be careful, we cannot advise you how you should approach your proposal, how you should build your business case. This is something for you to know. But if you have specific content-related questions clarifying the call text or the rules, we are of course there to help you. Now, if the questions are of general interest, they will be transformed into frequently asked questions and then made available to all the applicants. So in fact, to conclude on this, we have a robust IT tool available. It may be a bit complicated in the beginning, but you will see it's quite intuitive to use, and you can play around with it, and I'm sure you will find a good way of introducing the information in your proposal. Maybe also a last word on providing a little bit more detail about the evaluation process. It was already touched upon by Christian. So the evaluation will be performed indeed by independent experts. They are bound by strong confidentiality rules. They also will, we can also assure you that only experts that have no conflict of interest will assess your proposal. Now, we also combine several experts with different fields of competence in terms of expertise in order to have a full and solid evaluation of your proposal. The way we proceed is first the experts look individually to your proposal, and then they come together to build a consensus on the evaluation of your proposal. And the report which results out of this process, which is the evaluation report, will be shared with you. Maybe also good to know that the evaluation is done in a cascade approach. So first, the experts will look at the innovation criteria. If the proposal passes this criteria, and only then the maturity and greenhouse gas criteria are examined. And again, if the proposal passes these criteria, the last two criteria of scalability and cost efficiency are looked into. So this is in fact concludes my presentation, and I'm now open, of course, to listen to your questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks to the participants who are following us for submitting so many interesting questions. We will again try to choose the ones that can help most people. And I would like to start with one which has to do with the last slide that Mark presented. Potential applicants are asking what would be the content of the evaluation report that rejected projects will get. Is it going to contain only the score, or is there going to be any explanation of shortcomings?
Thank you for this question. This evaluation report will provide an assessment of the proposal against the various evaluation criteria. It will show the shortcomings and also the strength, the strong points of the proposal, and also the scores. However, as I indicated, in line with the cascade approach, if the proposal is not passing the first criteria, the following criteria in the cascade will not be evaluated. So on these aspects, there will be also no information in the report.
Thank you, Mark. Now moving to another topic, the consortium. There are many questions asking about what are the requirements for a consortium. Is there a limit to the maximum number of participants? Can, for example, one entity be both a part of a consortium in one application and then have an application as a single entity? Can universities be part of consortia? Can municipalities be part of consortia? Can laboratories? I think it's one of the most interesting topics for our participants. So what can you say about that?
That's indeed a very broad question. In terms of number of participants to a consortium, there is no limit. Also, in terms of type of organization, there are no specific requirements. Of course, the organization has to be a legal identity, but it can be a range of different type of organizations. So in fact, what I want to say that it's very much up to you as an applicant to see what is the best combination of partners that are most suitable to implement the project. You should not have too many applicants neither, because this makes also the administration of your project more complex, but all the essential partners that are needed to deliver the greenhouse gas emission reductions of your projects, we advise them to be part of the project. And they can be part of the project in a different capacity. They can be a full partner. They can be affiliated entities, so associated your sister company or your parent company can also be associated to the project, but you can also work with subcontractors. Subcontractors do not sign the grant agreement, but are then solely responsible towards the applicant. These are a few elements, but I'm sure that there may be more questions on the partnerships. But we are also happy to answer them now or also through the help desk.
Thank you. One more general question which concerns the timeline. So, first, how long would it take a project from the application to the moment the grant is awarded? And secondly, how often are we going to have Innovation Fund calls? Is it going to be more or less at the same time each year? Are there going to be annual calls? And can projects which have been rejected in one call apply for the next?
So on the timeline, we have the objective of 9 months of time to grant between the deadline of the application. So 9 months from the deadline, you can expect the time for your project to receive the contract. In relation to the frequency of the calls, this is a question that I would like to leave to Christian. On the possibility of resubmission, indeed, that possibility is there if your project is not selected, for instance, because it was not sufficiently mature. Then you can work on that. You can improve the project, possibly with the help of project development assistance, if this is allocated to you. And then at a later stage, you come back in a subsequent call. But maybe I pass the floor to Christian on the frequency of the calls.
Yes, maybe that's a good opportunity to clarify a bit further. We want to offer a certainty for you that we will also be there in future years in carrying out these calls. So our legal base allows us to go until 2030. And our current planning is to carry out each year 1 call for large-scale projects, 1 call for small-scale projects. We have a lot of flexibility how we can adjust the terms of the call, so also to respond to your demands, to see, okay, where are the interesting projects. So we are very much about lessons learned. So we already carried out a questionnaire on the experience of the applicants for the call for large-scale projects that we are currently looking into it and take this account for the next calls. So it's really about, as I also said in my presentation, we want to select for now those projects which are most mature to go ahead. If you are now working at a good idea, but you're not fully sure, okay, about the implementation, maybe you're still negotiating with several customers and so on, maybe don't hesitate to apply. Maybe project development assistance can help you. But if you think, okay, it's too big hassle to do it now, come to us next year. So this is really also an objective from our side, that we want to be here for the next 10 years.
Thank you, Christian. And now that you touched on the topic of project development assistance, it actually was covered by several questions. Can we repeat again what is the budget, what would be the scope of it, and how long would it take to complete?
So the budget is defined by the number of projects that will be served, the project development assistance. Applicants will not receive cash, they will not receive grants, but they will receive expertise from the colleagues in the European Investment Bank. And how deep, how long, how complex this assistance will be provided will depend on the project, because this will be bespoke service to the projects that will be selected, and we expect around up to 20 projects that will be receiving this project development assistance. Normally, the length of that service could be around 6 months, but in complex projects this could be longer. So again, this will be very much project specific.
Thank you very much, Roman. One more general question before we move to the next presentation, but it has actually attracted a lot of votes and interest. So how will the Innovation Fund support work with other funding programs? For example, national funding programs, Next Generation EU. If a project has been awarded a Horizon 2020 grant under the Green Deal call, can it then be expanded via the Innovation Fund?
Yes, we are very open to cooperation with other support programs. So from our side, the only limit is that there's no double funding of the same costs. Otherwise, what you can see is a funding across the timeline. So you come from maybe from a Horizon program, maybe from LIFE, and then there you have a demonstration project, and now you really want to go to the market. So you can follow up with us. And there's no problem of double funding, because this will be different costs. In terms of co-financing, of co-funding the same projects through different resources, yes, from our side, this is possible. But in particular, if you look at national funding, you always have to look at the state aid rules. So even if the Innovation Fund itself is not state aid, it's a public support. And very often, it's then taken into account when you calculate the maximum that you can still receive from national funding, so through state aid. So you have to look at how you can best combine that. We have on our website a primer on how to combine the Innovation Fund with other public funding, also with loans from the EIB or from other national promotional banks. So I would invite you to consult that. Maybe we can put on Slido somewhere the exact address of that paper. And yeah, so in particular in terms of the size of the projects, as we are here talking more about smaller projects, I think it's also a consideration is whether a funding from several public sources is not complicating too much your financial structure, but this is of course for you to judge.
Thank you. Also being mindful of time and of the interesting presentation which is coming next, I would suggest that we move on. Thanks.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for listening to us. So in this last part of today's webinar, we are going to guide you through the award criteria for the small-scale call as you find them in the application form Part B. Application form Part B is, of course, a very important document because it is through the information that applicants will provide in this form that evaluators will assess their proposal and be able to score it. So let me start with an overview of a recap of the different award criteria that are going to be assessed in the context of this single-stage selection procedure. So your application will be assessed against degree of innovation, greenhouse gases emissions avoidance, project maturity, scalability, and cost efficiency. And the objective of this, this last part of the webinar is to give you some tips, what our expectations are about these different award criteria, and so that you can fill the boxes as best as you can. And I'm going to present this together with my colleagues Roman Dubrava and Maria Velkova. So as Mark briefly touched upon, these different award criteria are going to be assessed following a cascading logic, meaning that evaluators will, first of all, assess degree of innovation, and proposals that reach the minimum score which is specified in the call text will make it to the second stage of the cascade, which is composed of greenhouse gases emissions avoidance and project maturity. And here again, projects will need to meet either a minimum score or some specific minimum requirements, which again are specified in the call text, to make it to the third and last stage of the cascade, where evaluators will assess their proposal against scalability and cost efficiency. So with the next slide, I provide an overview of the scoring that will apply in the context of the small-scale call. Right, so with this slide, I present the scoring applying to the small-scale call. So, as said, there will be 5 award criteria, and these criteria will be scored with a maximum number of points of 5, regardless of how many sub-criteria compose these different criteria. So, eventually, even if there are 2 or 3 sub-criteria, they will be normalized to a maximum of 5 points. Some of these criteria are subject to a minimum score. And on this slide, you see the minimum score that applies after normalization. So what does that minimum score basically means? Well, it is the score that a project needs to reach in order to be considered for funding. And I would like to make this, to insist on this difference, because there is a little subtlety. This score is not always the same score that you need to achieve in order to make it to the next stage of the cascade. So I would like to insist in particular on project maturity, for instance, because you need, in the context of project maturity, to score a minimum of 3 in order to get funding. However, it is enough to get a score of 2.5 under project maturity after normalization in order to make it to the last stage of the cascade. So that basically means that if a project is promising enough to be considered for project development assistance, it will also be assessed against scalability and cost efficiency. And then finally, in the last, in the right-hand column of this slide, you see that different weightings will be applied to these different award criteria. So greenhouse gases avoidance, scalability and cost efficiency will have a weighting of 1, whereas innovation and project maturity will have a double weighting in the context of this call. Now, with the next slide, I will dive into the first award criterion, which is degree of innovation, first in the cascading logic. So, under degree of innovation, what do we want to assess? We want to assess that, we want to make sure that a proposal, a project goes beyond the state of the art, and that the proposal goes beyond incremental innovation, which is why, in the context of application form part B, we ask you to describe the state of the art in your sector and to explain how your proposal goes beyond that state of the art. And as Christian mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, it is also, of course, very important that the innovation that you propose to introduce with your project is more than incremental. So that basically means that the proposed technology or the product or the process or the business model that your proposal introduces goes beyond minor changes. It needs to introduce a substantial new knowledge or substantially new technology. So a good pointer for that is, for example, an innovation that would contribute to implement the set plan implementation targets is likely to go beyond incremental innovation and therefore to score at least the pass mark of 3 points. So typically we would be looking to fund first of a kind commercialization or a commercial size demonstration of projects that have been previously proven at pilot scale or at smaller scale demonstration. And in that respect, I encourage you to consult Annex B of the call text, which provides some more guidance what we would consider to be going beyond the state of the art and what would constitute more than incremental innovation. And then finally, as already briefly touched upon by Christian, in the context of this call, we are keen to encourage specific activities, and this will be precisely done in the context of the degree of innovation. So technologies or projects that fall within these different areas of products that are substituting carbon-intensive ones, but also technologies in the field of direct air capture and overall technologies that have a potential for delivering net carbon removal will be considered favorably in the context of that degree of innovation criterion. I will leave it at that for now and pass the floor on to Maria, who will say some words about the criterion of greenhouse gases emissions.
Thank you, Marion. So I will try in brief terms to describe the criterion and what applicants will have to do in order to calculate greenhouse gas emission avoidance. We have given a lot of guidance in a specific document which is called Methodology for Calculation of Greenhouse Gas Emission Avoidance. So I encourage every applicant to read carefully the methodology, especially in the sections which are relevant for the project in question. Because in this short presentation, obviously, I cannot provide enough information. However, maybe we will have some webinars dedicated especially on greenhouse gas emission avoidance, so do follow the information on our site and on INEA site for updates on that. So, greenhouse gas emission avoidance is our first criterion, and that is very important for us because the main objective of projects should normally be significant emission avoidance. So that's why it's very important that we look at the potential for greenhouse gas emission avoidance. What we do is we will look at the absolute and relative emission avoidance. The absolute emission avoidance is actually the difference between the expected greenhouse gas emissions of the project and the greenhouse gas emissions in the reference scenario over a 10-year period of time after entry into operation. It is important here to note that we will be monitoring projects generally only for a period of 3 years of time. However, for the calculation, you will have to calculate the emission avoidance over 10-year period of time. There would be cases, perhaps, that projects will not be able to reach full emission avoidance in 3 years. In such cases, applicants can actually request a longer period for monitoring and reporting, but in any case, not longer than 10 years. The relative emission avoidance, on the other hand, would be the absolute emission avoidance, as calculated above, divided by the greenhouse gas emissions in the reference scenario that is given in percentage. So, if you could move to the next slide, please. What applicants will have to do? In fact, we look at this criterion based on your calculation. Or the evaluators, which we will employ, will check your calculation. So it's very important that you calculate correctly the absolute and relative emission avoidance. We ask you to support the calculation with an editable Excel sheet. And as announced by Mark earlier on, we are making calculation tool templates available on the Funding and Tenders portal. They are not appearing yet on the portal, but will appear either today or, well, in the course of this week. We advise you to use those templates because it will be both easier for you and for the evaluation if the calculations are presented in this way. You will have to also explain all the assumptions made and the consistency with the methodology that we are advising you to use. This can be done partially in this template and partially in the application form B in the relevant spaces for that. What I would like here to underline is that there are two specific requirements for certain types of projects. There will be some projects which will be from the energy-intensive industry and are producing or aiming to produce products which have an EU ETS benchmark. We have a minimum requirement that such projects will have to meet at least the EU ETS benchmark. This benchmark will be the one which is applicable at the deadline of submissions of the applications. Please be aware that there is a current revision of the EU ETS benchmarks, which this revision will be adopted most likely in February, meaning that you will have to check this revision in order to do the calculation and to demonstrate the meeting of this requirement. I also would like to underline that we are looking for breakthrough innovation, so our expectation actually is that such projects will not only just about meet the ETS benchmark, but will be well below this EU ETS benchmark. A further requirement is for the projects using biomass as a feedstock. Such projects will have to explain how they are going to procure sustainable biomass, so biomass feedstocks that will meet at least the minimum sustainability requirements of the Renewable Energy Directive. So, if you could move, yes, thank you, the next slide. That is, so first in the upper part of the slide, you see a simplified process for deriving the calculation and submitting it. First, of course, you define your project and its boundaries. And second, it will be very important that you choose correctly the sector. As explained, you will have to indicate this in application form A, but also in B. And we have given hopefully sufficient guidance in the methodology for greenhouse gas emission avoidance. There is an annex there which explains the sectors. And if you could move please to the next slide. What is important there, in most cases, so the annex will guide you, but in most cases, I want to reassure you that the choice of sector should be rather easy. And that will be the cases when there is one principal product, such as wind energy or cement production. But because of the variety of cases of projects we expect, it is possible that the product you will be producing or the sector is not mentioned there. So, or there could be more than one principal products, for example. So, for example, if the all principal products are in one sector, like chemicals, the production of different types of chemicals or different types of fuels, then the sector choice would be relatively easy, again, chemicals or refineries, respectively. However, there could be projects, even small-scale projects, that combine innovations from different sectors. You may call them cross-sectoral projects, but for the purposes of the Innovation Fund, you will need still to choose the most important sector of the innovation of the principal product. But you do have a choice in such a case. And in some cases, apart from principal products, there will be co-products. Don't forget to indicate them in the place provided for in the application form. So I would like to give you an example which involves different cases of use of hydrogen. Hydrogen is a very versatile energy carrier and has many uses, and therefore it could be that such projects fall in different sectors. For example, if there is a hydrogen production from otherwise curtailed renewable electricity, i.e. renewable electricity that will be lost, such a project most probably will best suited for the energy storage sector. However, if there is a similar project for production of hydrogen with renewable energy, but you're trying to produce as much hydrogen as possible, maybe even from grid electricity, then the relevant sector where you need to enter such projects would be hydrogen. And here it is important to note also that for the reference emissions, you would need to use the EU ETS benchmark for hydrogen. There could be cases where there are innovative projects which use hydrogen for transport application. We don't have a sector which is transport. That's why the sector you will need to choose would still be hydrogen, but then the reference will be the fossil fuel comparator for the transport fuel that such a project would be displacing. A final example would be if you combine actually production of hydrogen with production of innovative renewable electricity. In such a case, as mentioned before, that can be considered a cross-sectoral project or even a hybrid project. But the sector choice, there is a sector choice in that case, and this could be renewable electricity or energy storage. So, the methodology which we have prepared has different sections, and on this slide actually you can see the main sections which concern the activities of different projects. And so when you know your project, you will need to find the respective methodology parts where there is a lot of guidance how to calculate the emission avoidance. So we have specific sections for energy-intensive industries, which includes also the calculations, the principle for calculations of emission avoidance for substitute products, for biofuels, and for carbon capture and utilization. Then there is a section on carbon capture and storage, a section on renewable electricity heating and cooling, and a section on energy storage. There could be cases, as I mentioned, where projects are combining innovations from different categories. In such cases, the calculation has to be broken down, and you will need to use the methodology from the different sections. As I said in my previous slide, you can combine the calculations from renewable electricity and energy storage, or renewable electricity and carbon capture and storage, etc. So, next slide. As I mentioned, we have worked to create calculation tools for all possible categories of projects, all possible sectors. The calculation tools are rather automatic and straightforward for carbon capture and storage, renewable electricity heating and cooling, and energy storage projects. However, as there is a very big variety of cases in energy-intensive industries, we have not been able to provide an automated calculation tool. However, the tool which we are providing will help you in presenting the calculations, and also it provides all the useful number conversion factors which we have introduced into methodology, and you will have to use in the calculations depending, of course, on your specific case. So we advise you to find these tools and use them to prepare your calculation. So, next slide. I would like with that slide to provide you a summary of, it is really a summary of the possible reference and project cases in the different categories and sectors we have. All the details are in the methodology, so this doesn't provide perhaps a complete picture, but it gives you an idea. So in energy-intensive industries, we have as a general, the reference scenario is the EU ETS benchmarks for products. In some cases, an existing plant could be used if there is just a modification of this existing plant. In the case of biofuels, the reference is the adapted fossil fuel comparators. Adapted because they are made comparable or consistent with the EU ETS benchmarks, and the numbers are given in the methodology. In both cases, in all cases, in fact, in energy-intensive industry, but across actually the projects, it is important to be underlined that electricity, which is used as an input, is considered with an emission factor of 0 in view of the future decarbonization of the electricity grid. That is, in fact, what you will need to consider in the project scenario. In the project scenario, in addition to electricity as an input, which may be an input or may not be, you need to consider all changes in inputs, processes, products, use, and end of life. For carbon capture and storage, on the other hand, the methodology considers as a reference the CO2 that would otherwise be released from a power plant or from energy-intensive industry, or would otherwise be present in the atmosphere in the case of direct air capture. There, for the project scenario, you would need to consider any emissions which will be generated due to the capture and storage of and the storage of the CO2. Transport is mentioned here, but in fact it is only in the case that it is transported over 5,000 kilometers. So in fact, in most cases that will be disregarded. For renewable electricity, if you're producing, if you will be producing renewable electricity, the reference scenario is the expected 2030 electricity mix. For renewable heating, that is a natural gas boiler. That is the normal reference, well, the expected reference case or conventional case. For renewable cooling, it is, in most cases, it would be the expected 2030 electricity mix, as we're expecting that cooling is normally done via electricity, but applicants, in some cases, may argue and use the fossil fuel comparators if that is properly justified. In the cases of renewable electricity heating and cooling, only the project emissions linked to supply of biomass-derived fuels, and in the case of geothermal projects, if they are leakages in the form of CO2 or other greenhouse gas emission gases, these have to be considered. Finally, for energy storage, we have provided for with reference emissions, and these are different depending on type of storage. In the case of electricity storage, the reference scenario is a single-cycle natural gas turbine. For heating or hydrogen storage, this would be the ETS benchmarks for heat and hydrogen. And finally, for energy storage in vehicles, this would be the diesel-fueled internal combustion engine. There are also other possible cases. Please look at the methodology. We have been quite detailed and hopefully helpful to the applicants. On the other hand, for the project emissions, in the case of energy storage, they are rather limited emissions that are considered, and they are linked to direct or indirect emissions from the use of fossil fuels and generation of heat in the project scenario. So, next slide, which is one of my last slides. This is actually an emphasis on the way how we treat electricity as an input or an output of projects. So basically, when electricity is an input, as I already said, emission factor is 0. Whereas, like if it is an output, depending on the case, whether it is renewable electricity or energy storage, there is different reference emissions used, which I already explained, so I won't repeat in the interest of time. So, next slide. This is actually a snapshot of like what will happen when you are done with the calculations and ready to upload. So don't forget to upload the calculations. And my last slide will perhaps be of interest, and I hope it is of interest because it explains the scoring of the greenhouse gas emission avoidance. So the scoring is broken down for the two sub-criteria, absolute and relative emission avoidance. The absolute emission avoidance will be calculated within each sector. That's why it's so important that you identify correctly the sector for your project. The best in the sector will receive a 5, and all other projects will receive scores which are calculated based on the best in sector absolute emission avoidance. It is important, of course, to note that only projects which are meeting the minimum requirements, the ETS benchmarks and biomass sustainability will be considered for this scoring. The relative emission avoidance, on the other hand, as this will be calculated in percentage and it's relatively easier to calculate, 100% of emission avoidance will result in 5 points. Any emission avoidance which is more than 100%, and that is possible in some cases, will be considered under degree of innovation criterion. Then the total of 10 will be normalized to a score of 5. Just last point I want to make here is that this The calculations which are provided by the applicants, of course, will be very thoroughly checked. So points may be reduced if calculations are not robust or accurate. We will be also looking for clerical and manifest errors. Clerical errors are minor errors which can be easily corrected, and if such an error is identified, applicants will be contacted and the error can be corrected. However, please be careful, because there would be cases, hopefully not too many, of manifest errors. So these are errors which compromise the calculation, and if such errors are detected by the evaluators, such projects will be rejected. So this is from me on greenhouse gas emission avoidance. Then we will continue with project maturity criterion.
Thank you, Maria. So let's move now to the project maturity criteria. As Christian already mentioned at the beginning, the Innovation Fund is different. And it is different from the other EU programs in a sense that what we are after are projects that will essentially enter the market and will succeed in their endeavors by selling their products or services to their customers. That's why under the project maturity, we decided to give it a double weight in assessing the projects. And that's why the entry ticket for the competition under the call is in fact that the projects will have to come with ready feasibility study and a business plan. So this also answers a couple of questions in the Slido: at which stage the project should come in, whether the first pilot operations would be eligible or not. The answer to that is that the project should enter the call when the feasibility study and the business plan is already developed to the stage that will ensure the evaluators that will be assessing your projects as any other investor would, that the project is mature and is developed sufficiently so that it can reach financial close within 4 years or faster. What are we looking at the project maturity? This is indeed the implementation maturity, which combines on one hand side the technical elements of your project and business elements of your project that will look into your markets, into your customers, into you as a project team, and in fact the preparedness of the project to produce and sell. Then we will look at the financial maturity, which is essentially the picture of your numbers, of your costs, of your revenues, of your profitability, and the soundness of your financial model, which should be part of the business plan. Next slide. So let's have a deeper look here. Under the technical feasibility, you are required to submit your feasibility study. There is no predefined template for the feasibility study nor for the business plan, because you should present it as you would present it to any other investor or funder. But the feasibility study and the business plan should follow at least the questions that are posed in the application form, so that there is an overall consistency of your story and where the different parts of your story link and match together. So under the technical feasibility, you should be able to present where are you with the technology development, what was the previous parts or stages of your technology development, were there any pilot tests, were there any results achieved in the previous stage, and how well are you prepared with scaling up, with using those results in a new circumstances related to your project. You should be aware that whenever putting information into the application form, please make very precise references to any supporting documents text, whether it is the feasibility study or the business plan. And the key question under the technical side is indeed, can your technology deliver the output that you are planning to deliver? And this should be also reflected in your financials, in your sizing, and whether that output will guarantee the greenhouse gas emissions that you intend to avoid. Next slide, please. Then we look to the business side of your project, which should be presented along your milestones and deliverables as the project will be moving on, from the signature of your grant agreement through the preparations of the financial close, through the construction and entry into operation. And again, you should provide a consistent story reflected in your application form. You should present your business plan, again, as a mandatory document. That business plan should look into your markets, into your customers, whether there is a demand for your products and services, how well is that demand evidenced, how well can you justify your numbers, your expectations, your calculations. You should also describe whether there are any market entry barriers and how would you look at those entry barriers and avoid those barriers, because we want you to achieve your financial close in 4 years. So we want you to be sure that the project will enter into operation and succeed. Another very important area that you should describe very well in your application is your team. So who you are, who are the people behind the project, who are your key decision makers, and how do you organize yourself for the project to ensure that whenever a situation arises, you are able to take decisions effectively and implement the project on the market. And again, you will see in the application form, you are asked to submit the CVs, the profiles of the people behind the project. And this is the question that would be asked by any investor when looking into feasibility of the investment. So the key question that we are looking here in the business side is whether your business model is sound. Next slide, please. Then we look to the deployment side of the project. How well are you defining and addressing any regulatory requirements or issues, whether it is related to permitting procedures, whether it is to any regulatory elements that you need to follow. How far are you with permitting processes? Have you already received any permits or licenses, for instance, for the IP, etc.? And what is your plan to achieve them, to reach them in time so that the project enters as planned and as described in your application? Another very important element is from the other side. So who are your key suppliers? Who are your key off-takers? And how well can you justify your story when you describe, I'm going to sell XY tons of a certain product? Is this essentially evidenced by any pre-agreements, any memoranda of understanding, any discussions with your future customers? And here the link is made to the pioneer customers concept that we are trying to introduce in this small-scale call in particular. So you should always describe where you stand today with your project, what are your objectives, and how are you getting there? What is your strategy to achieve that your milestones, your timing, and your deliverables will be met as planned? So again, the key questions here: what is your deployment strategy? How well is it justified? How well is it evidenced? What is your sale plan? How are you planning to achieve that? And who are your partners? You should describe also who they are, how robust they are, and what are the contingency measures in case you would have issues with delivery. Another sub-criteria that we will look at is the financial maturity. And again, in case of the Innovation Fund, the numbers really matter, whether it is the greenhouse gas emissions, as you have seen, but also when it comes to the financial part, where you are required to describe your costs, your revenues, your profitability, where you are required also to submit the financial model as part of the business plan, which is a normal corporate financial model that you would use for any business plan when talking to an investor. So you should again look and describe what your costs are. You should break those costs according to CapEx categories. You should explain other costs like operating costs. And you should be very clear in the expectations when it comes to your revenues, because they need to be justified. You need to provide on which basis those revenues have been put in your application. Very important element, which again comes from another project that we have seen in the past, is that these projects will be indeed sensitive to external factors, whether it is regulatory elements, whether it is the fact that some of the investors may drop very shortly before financial close, etc. So you should present a very robust and tangible strategy for contingency measures to analyze your risks and to describe your risk mitigation steps and plan. So, and you should also describe your relevant cost, which is in the case of the Innovation Fund, your capital expenditure, and how much are you requesting from the Innovation Fund, so what is the grant proportion of those costs. So again, the key questions here, numbers really matter, and how robust, how well designed and clear is your financial model. Would any other investor trust it? Because our evaluators will be looking at your project with this optique. Then we look at the financial viability of your investment. So what is the profitability? Is this project bankable? What is the net present value, the internal rate of return? Here, every project will have its own financials. So we do not have, let's say, a minimum return that we would expect from every project. If your expected return is low due to the high risk, we would at least expect that the project sponsors will be very strongly motivated for such project, even if the profitability is lower. And this should be very clearly explained in your financing plan, where your financial structure, which is a setup of your equity or debt financing, any other funding that you will use to cover your costs, should be related to the risk that the project, the risk profile that the project represents. So you should also describe how any negative cash flows at the beginning when you invest would be covered, how the project scale up at the later stages will be funded, what would be the allocation of costs across the plan for implementation, across your work packages. And a very important question here is also the alignment of requested funding and milestones with the profile of your cash flow consumption. So how would you inject the funding from the Innovation Fund across the implementation of your project? So the key questions in this area: what is your financial structure, whether the funding and the revenues that you are planning can cover your costs and return on investment. And very important question in financial structuring is how much skin in the game do you as an applicant have? What is the level of equity? What is the level of own funding to the project? Another part that we will look at under financial maturity, and very important one, is how robust is your design? How well and how committed your funders and investors are? Can we believe that once the grant agreement is signed, the others will play ball and other investors will invest into the project? So you should explain all this in your application form and evidence this by the letters of commitment, by the pre-agreements, by memorandum of understanding as annex to your application form. You should also describe the status, the level, and the solidity of the commitment of your funders and investors, but also the conditions of support that those investors would expect, because any return on equity or any service to cover the debt needs to be covered by your revenues and by the funding of the project. So the questions that are important here, just to make it simpler: how quickly can the projects really reach the financial close? Because this is indeed mirrored in your financial structuring. Is it within 4 years or faster? Obviously, the faster you can reach your financial close, the better, and the higher score you will receive. Whether the project funding is secured, what is the stage today, what is your plan, what are your steps, what is the evidence for that, and what is the ownership structure in the project. And we have provided a nice example in the application form. I think it's section 4.4, where you will see a diagram where you can graphically design and describe how those elements between the investors and project are set. Now I would move on to the scalability, and I believe it's Marian, please.
Yes, thanks, Roman. The next criterion in line is indeed scalability. And under scalability, what matters is that basically we assess a project's potential for being more than a niche application and for creating positive spillovers beyond the mere boundaries of the project. And we assess this on 3 different levels. First, at the project and regional economy level. Second, at the sector level, and finally at the economy-wide level. So when it comes to the project and the regional economy level, what we basically want to assess is the potential for possible expansion of the project within the same project site, or the potential for transfers of the technology or the business model or the project to other sites. We also here want to know whether there is possibility for cooperation with other actors of the regional economy. And finally, the third point that matters to us under this dimension is the plans of the applicants in terms of communicating about its projects with the general public, and in terms of engaging with stakeholders in the context of knowledge sharing. So making sure that the results of the projects are communicated in a way so as to benefit other possible, potential projects. At the sector level, we want to check the extent to which the project can be applied within the sector, so outside of the boundaries of the project. And here we would like to ask you to substantiate this potential of your projects for positive spillovers at the level of the sectors with qualitative indicators, and where possible also quantitative indicators. So that could be, for instance, the amount of greenhouse gases emissions that a project could in the future help save at the level of the sector, but there is no, of course, specific methodology for that, so it's really depending on the availability of such data. And we would, of course, also need to ask you to explain the assumptions that you use when coming up with such quantitative indicators. And in this respect, it's also important to consider the demand and supply conditions that would apply both in the medium and in the long term. So that basically means that you need to take into account, when looking at the potential impact of your project at the level of the sector, at possible resource constraints that may apply in an economy that is transitioning to climate neutrality, but also in the long term at the resource constraints or cost developments in a fully decarbonized economy. And yes, and the same also applies at the economy-wide. So this is the third dimension. We are interested to see the potential for your sector, for your project to have an impact at the economy-wide level. So here again, we are interested to see any qualitative or quantitative indicators that you will be able to provide to us in this respect, to exemplify whether your project, for instance, might be able to create new value chains or to reinforce existing value chains. So I will leave it at that as regards scalability, and hand back the floor to Roman for the last award criterion.
So cost efficiency criterion is the last one. As we already mentioned, this is the criterion which is numerical. So the numbers really matter in the Innovation Fund. And the cost efficiency score will be derived through a cost efficiency ratio, which is calculated as your relevant costs less contribution by the applicant, whether it is private or public contribution to the project. That is divided by the absolute greenhouse gas emissions that you calculate in the first criterion over the 10 years. And this score will be then calculated automatically. What is important to mention here, that your relevant costs are the capital expenditure. I saw a couple of questions in a Slido related what costs are there. So what we mean by capital expenditure here is the construction costs, the site infrastructure if it's not included in those costs, the development costs, and intangible assets that are needed to be introduced to demonstrate the technology in the project. Those costs need to be consistent with the applicable accounting standard, and you have a specific reference to that in the call text. So those are the capital expenditure that would be eligible, and this is divided by your greenhouse gas emissions avoidance over 10 years. What is important to mention is that it is mandatory to attach your detailed calculation of relevant costs and cost efficiency in one editable Excel document with the application, and that the grant that you ask from the Innovation Fund cannot go beyond 60% of your relevant costs. Now, what are the supporting documents? I already mentioned the business plan and the feasibility study. The business plan should include your financial model. Together, the feasibility study and the business plan have a page limit of 100 pages. But other documents are also obviously the detailed calculation of greenhouse gas emissions avoidance potential, where there is no page limit. The detailed calculation of relevant cost and cost efficiency that I just mentioned, without any page limit, because this is editable Excel document. And then to underpin the project maturity from the project consortia or the applicant point of view, the description of profiles of the people and the list of the relevant projects, so the track record of the applicant or consortium that has a page limit of 20 pages. If you have any existing due diligence report by a third party to underpin your reasoning, to provide additional weight to your story, this is an optional document, and you can upload it as well together with your application. And please use the help desk that has been put online for you, whether it is the IT help desk or whether it is the specific help desk related to the award criteria which we just presented. And we are ready to look at those questions, answer those questions together with the colleagues in INEA. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Roman. Let's move to the Q&A session. First of all, thanks to all participants. We have over 500 people connected and more than 250 questions, which is great interest. Thank you for that. Let me make a few clarifications. The presentations and the recording of today's webinar will be made available at DG CLIMA and at INEA website. So you can sit down, watch it calmly. We realize that these are extremely dense 3 hours full of information. So you can split it in small chunks and focus on it little by little and watch it as many times as you need. As Roman highlighted, there is the help desk, where if your question has not been answered orally via Slido, you read the call text, you read the supporting documents, read the FAQs, and you still have questions, don't hesitate to use the help desk. In terms of providing written answers in Slido, we try to answer the most simple questions, providing links, for example, the one on combination with funding programs. But in general, we are not in a position to answer all questions received in Slido. Also because it is more transparent for applicants to use the help desk. Now, let's move to the questions. I will try to start from the beginning of the presentation. So first, a few questions for Marion when it comes to the degree of innovation criterion. Do we have somewhere further guidance on what is considered incremental innovation?
So yes, indeed, beyond the pointers that I gave in the context of this presentation, the available information is in the Annex B to the call text. So that's basically part of the call text document, but the last pages of it.
Thank you, Marian. This only shows that people should read till the last pages and the footnotes. You never know where something useful is hiding. Another question. Can we please repeat the 3 encouraged activities and also explain, do we have any earmarking of budget per sector? How are we going to ensure that not the whole call goes to only these 3 encouraged activities? Thanks.
So the three sectors or activities in question are substitute products, which basically means products that have the same function as an existing product, an already commercially available, more standard product, but that will, when being produced or used, will reduce greenhouse gases emissions, or use less greenhouse gases emissions. So many different examples can come to mind. A lot of these, for instance, in the building sector. So you could think, for instance, hemp insulation replacing mineral wool insulation, but many more examples can come to mind within building sector, but also in other different kinds of sector. The important is that the function is the same as an existing product, which is more carbon intensive. The second activity is direct air capture, which would be used in combination with carbon capture and storage. And finally, the last group of encouraged activities are all activities that would lead to the net removal of carbon. So in other words, leading to more than 100% of relative greenhouse gases emissions avoidance when applied. There is no earmarking for these specific activities. So basically, the only way that these different activities will be given, so to speak, preferential treatment is through the degree of innovation criterion, where they might get extra points. But of course, for a project to be selected and awarded a grant under the Innovation Fund, what matters is that it gets the higher score across all different criteria, and there is no earmarking across different sectors.
Thank you, Marian. Maybe now we move to the greenhouse gas emissions criterion, where there were a lot of very technical questions, but I'll try to ask the ones which can be understood and explained relatively quickly and simply. So are we looking only at CO2 or at all greenhouse gases?
Thank you, Melina. We are considering all greenhouse gases, actually, so not only CO2, and we know that there could be such projects, and they are welcome.
Thanks, Maria. There was a group of questions, basically what tolerance is there between the real emission, between the emissions to be avoided, which are promised, if you want, in the application, and the real emissions which will be avoided once the project is up and running?
Thank you. That is a very good question indeed, because obviously you are at the stage when you are planning an innovative project, quite often at a higher scale than you have done. So there is no 100% certainty that you can achieve the promised greenhouse gas emission avoidance. This is why you will need to reach only 75% of the promised emission avoidance in order to get 100% of the grant. However, of course, if you have really very big doubts, we advise you to take more conservative assumptions in the calculation in order to get indeed the full grant.
Thank you very much. There was quite a group of questions which refer to the basically the methodology for the greenhouse gas emission avoidance, which you explained, but maybe we can say who is best positioned to prove it. For example, the same company who can do EU ETS emission verification, so who can really audit and verify the emission avoidance which projects submit, and based on what methodology?
So yes, indeed, once projects enter into operation, they will have to submit a verification of the greenhouse gas emissions achieved, and it is possible indeed that they use ETS verifiers. However, they will have to follow the methodology which we have prescribed. But the good point here is that, in fact, the calculations will be done using the same assumptions that you have done during the calculation. So, for example, as we mentioned, emission factor for electricity is 0. This will be kept. And any other assumption that is accepted, of course, during the evaluation is going to be maintained. Perhaps it's worthwhile to note, though, is that there will be knowledge sharing on the actual emission avoidance. So you will need to, actually, that is quite late in the process once you have entered into operation, but you would need to submit sufficient information that the actual greenhouse gas emission avoidance is calculated, and that information would also be made public.
Thank you. And maybe one last question. What about the monitoring plan? Does it have to be included in the file by all applicants or only provided for selected projects? And is it an independent report or is it within the project application?
Thank you for the question. Indeed, perhaps we have not been entirely clear how this should be done. In fact, in the calculation tools, which will soon be on the Funding and Tenders portal, under the various tabs, and especially obviously under the tab Project Emissions, there are specific columns where you can indicate, in fact, how you plan to monitor each specific data entry, which is the responsible body, what is the frequency of monitoring, the measuring equipment. So in fact, it is possible to integrate the monitoring plan, and it is quite welcome into the calculation Excel sheet.
Thank you. And maybe one last clarification. Can applicants use the Excel tools which were published for the large-scale call, or should they wait for the specific Excel tool, and where are they going to find it?
Yes, so please wait for the appropriate tools to be uploaded, because we have done some simplifications of the methodology. Some project emissions will not be considered. So there is a risk that if you use the tools for the large scale, you may actually take into consideration more project emissions. The principles of the methodology, however, are really quite similar, so the error would not be too big, but still I advise you to wait. You will be able to find them under the tab call documents, and in the Funding and Tenders portal. So all information is really stored in one place. All relevant documents are listed one under the other.
Thank you very much for the extensive clarifications. I suggest we move to project maturity now. It is one of the areas which is attracting most questions. So I'm going to start with one which has been voted quite a lot. So, Roman, what do we mean by projects ready for the market? Do we mean that the market should already exist?
No, what we mean is that after the project enters into operation, so after the construction is finished, it will start deliver the greenhouse gas emissions avoided, whether it is through sale of its products, whether it is through turning of the turbines, whether it is through products that are produced in the energy-intensive industry.
Thank you. Another question of definition, which comes in various forms. What do we mean by financial close? When does a project reach financial close?
You will find the definition of that in the call text, but in essence, this is the moment when you have the green light from all main project parties, from your funders and investors, to go ahead with placing legally binding orders.
Thank you. This is linked actually to another question which comes up. So, do you need to attach letters of intent of interested customers to your application? How do you deal with a situation in which you don't have the final approval of the customer and maybe he's not a part of your application?
You should always reflect at which stage you are in the project, but the more evidence you can provide in your application, even if it is in the form of pre-agreements or memoranda of understanding. But obviously, the more developed they are and more binding they are, the better. Provide that evidence.
Thank you. And what about the permits? Should the project have all the permits needed at the proposal stage, or should they have the proof that they have applied for them and describe how they're going to obtain them?
In ideal world, the project applying should already have the permits, but again, as we talk about innovative solutions and technologies, we do expect that these permits will come along the project implementation, but you should present very clearly where you are, what permits do you have, how far are you in those procedures, and when do you expect and how do you expect to achieve them.
Thank you. Another question which comes in various forms concerns newly set up companies, startups. So is there a template for a business plan that can be submitted instead of the financial records of a company? What should a company do if they don't have 3 years of financial records?
You will find again those areas covered in the call text and in the model grant agreement. Your business plan should be designed at least to cover the questions that are included in the application form. If you don't have 3 years of the financial records, as being a startup, you should be at least in the position to very well and deeply present your partner. So if this is, for instance, an SPV, a special purpose vehicle created specifically for this project, you should be very deep in presenting your partners, your legal setup, your financial setup, and the track record of those people behind the SPV. Mark, I hope I said it right.
Thank you. And maybe one last question. At what stage of the project is it necessary to confirm the availability of the additional 40% of the funding? And in what form should this be presented? And then secondary, does it concern signed financing agreement, letters of intention, applications for other EU funds? And there was a linked interesting question. Does the availability of additional funding actually diminish the chances of a project getting funded in terms of its higher bankability?
Okay, maybe this relates to the EIC situation, but we are one stage ahead. And for us, what is important that you meet your financial close within 4 years, and the faster you do it, the better. It is not only the question of additional 40% to the relevant cost coverage, but the coverage of all costs of the project. So you should be able to present the application with the evidence, with the annexes to our application. How are you intending to achieve that? What are the funders? What is the financial structure? And how your costs would be covered. We do not expect you to have all 100% covered when you apply. But this should be consistent with your claims on when do you intend to reach the financial close, because that is the ultimate moment when all the funding must be on the table, signed and available.
Thank you. And maybe one last question. Should the market entry take place within the final 3 years of the project, or can it be earlier? Sorry. Should the entry into the market of the project be in its last 3 years of operation, or can a project actually have a shorter duration?
I mean, the question is probably looking into how long should the project operate, whether it is 3 years or longer. What we are looking at is the 3 years of monitoring period as a minimum, but obviously this is a taxpayer funding, so we expect you to be there and to be showcasing the business model that we are supporting. So we expect you to stay on the market, to grow, to expand, to export.
Yes, thank you. Maybe I didn't put the question in the clearest way, but I think the answer very well covered what I meant. Now, I would like to move to a question we got on scalability for Marian. Do we have a definition of scalability at regional level?
So you mean in the sense, what would be the meaning of a region in that sense? No, we don't have a definition. It's not set in stone, but I would say that what matters is, for this dimension, is the geographical area which is economically relevant to a project. So that could be an entire country, especially if the country is small, but that could, of course, also be regional area which is cross-border, for instance, if the project is of relevance, including cross-border, that could very well be the case.
Thank you very much. I would like to move to the last criteria of cost efficiency, and there were a lot of questions on which costs are relevant, which costs are eligible, which I think Roman clarified a little bit, and more is explained in detail in the code text. But nevertheless, I would like to pose a question which comes also as a comment. What about OPEX? Do we cover operational costs, which are quite big in some cases? How do we deal with that?
No, OPEX is not eligible cost under the Innovation Fund. Sorry, small-scale coal, indeed. Thank you for this very important element. For the small-scale coal, OPEX is not a part of the relevant costs.
And actually, this is part of the simplification of the definition of relevant costs. So, then another question which was coming on costs. What about the preparation of different technical documents which are needed for the project? Are they part of the eligible costs? What about staff and personnel costs? What about project development, documentation, design, concept design, etc.?
If they are part of the capital expenditure, so for instance the construction costs, they can be included.
Okay, and what about capital costs incurred prior to the signature of grant agreement?
This is at the risk of the applicant. You can start incurring costs as of submission of the application, but obviously we cannot guarantee that your project will be selected. So in case it will not be selected, obviously you will not be supported through the Innovation Fund grant. But you can start incurring costs as of submission of your application.
Thank you. There were quite a few questions about the grant disbursement. So first, can we clarify if the grant disbursement will start from the day of the closure of the call, so March 21, or from the day of the award of the grants? Maybe it's obvious, but I think it's good to say it. And then the second question is, since most of the CapEx will occur between the financial close and the entry of the operation, what percentage of the grant can be paid in that period?
Good questions. Obviously, the grant disbursement will start after the signature of the grant agreement, so only after the award. The proportion of the funding was already mentioned by Christian, so you can receive up to 40% by the financial close and the rest after the financial close. How the remaining 60% is spread over time should be a function of, as I mentioned, the cost injection across the milestones and implementation of the project. But you should also take into account that once the project enters the monitoring period, we will check the greenhouse gas emissions avoided. And if you do not achieve at least 75% of your emissions, we may recover the grant that has already been paid.
Thank you very much, Roman. There was another question, whether there is a limit to subcontracting costs and how should the contribution of different partners be structured? And is there, can there be contribution in kind in some cases?
I may reply part of it, and then probably Mark can come in with the in-kind contributions. This is a lump sum grant, which is based upon delivery of your milestone. So how do you structure your internal payments within the consortium with your partner is your business. There is no limit when it comes to the subcontracting because it can be part of the costs. And when it comes to the in-kind contribution, Mark probably could.
So in principle, in-kind contributions can be accounted for. However, you need to see, I would say, how in practice this would make sense also from the perspective of the project. So in principle, yes, but to be seen on a case-by-case basis whether this really makes sense or not.
Because here we are talking about investment projects. So this is not research and innovation project where you have mostly costs related to staff, to studies, etc. We are talking hard investment here. So also the kind of the importance of in-kind contribution is probably less relevant for Innovation Fund than in Horizon Europe, for instance.
Thank you. And one last question, which I find quite interesting. Can projects leave out some of their capital costs from their funding application so they improve their cost efficiency?
Well, this is your decision, but you will need to present the project total costs, and you will need to reflect your costing in your financial model. If there will be still financial gap that will not be covered, obviously, your project will face financial risks, and this would be to the detriment not only of the scoring, but of any sensible implementation of the project.
Thank you. And maybe one last general questions, actually two. We have so many that I cannot not pose them. How many projects are estimated to receive a grant from this call?
As many as possible and as good as possible. We have 100 million euros put at the disposal of the selected projects.
Thank you. And one last, actually two last questions, sorry, towards Mark. Is it possible in the Funding and Tenders portal to search for a partner or offer?
This is something that the colleagues in the IT are looking into. It's for the moment not yet available, but hopefully for the next call, this feature may be available. So not for the moment, but it is something to be kept in perspective for the future.
Thank you. And one other technical question, which I find actually quite important. What is the difference between the status of submitted and the status final in the My Proposals portal? When can people be sure that actually their project is final?
Well, when a proposal is submitted before the deadline, you can still change it. It only becomes final, I would say, after the deadline when you cannot change it anymore. So I would see it from that perspective.
Thank you. I think we have tried to answer as many questions as we can. Thanks very much to our viewers for the very active participation. In case you, after watching and rewatching the seminar, seeing the slides, reading the code text, reading the FAQs, which will be published soon, going through the Excel tools, which will also be published soon, you still have questions, please don't hesitate to use the help desk. And with this, I would pass the floor for final conclusions.
Thank you, Melina. You've seen this has been a very rich session, and I think what you should appreciate is that we want to be open to all your projects. In whatever size I wanted to say, I mean, whatever size up to 7.5 million euros, or between 2.5 million euros and 7.5 million euros, they come. Whether you want to do it on your own, whether you want to do it with a consortium partner, however you want to set up your business case, here we are. And it's the first time that we're doing this. So we also need to learn. And you've had a lot of questions is, okay, do I need a memorandum of understanding? Do I already need a signed contract, and so on? And we are very open to that. But of course, we have to see who will apply. and like what your competitors there are doing. So we are very excited to see like which level of documentation you can provide us. And so then for the second call that we want to start in 21, we can probably already give you more guidance on the experiences of the lessons learned with this call. So I would say just don't be afraid, make a good pitch, and yeah, very much looking forward to your proposals. And as I've said several times, we are very much looking forward to your feedback, and we are doing this also right now. So if you want to, please don't hesitate to go to Slido and reply to some short questions on how you liked our webinar today. If you have any ideas how we can improve it, very much welcome. And then, so to conclude, I would like to very much thank our colleagues from INEA, in particular Mark, Gabriel, and also the technical service that has been impeccable for today. I mean, it's not only like this one webinar. We've done so much together this year in starting up the Innovation Fund. It has really been a lot of fun for us, but also a lot of happiness that with the call for the large scale projects, we found so much echo with you with the more than 300 applications. And also, as Mark said, we are hoping for an equally great response here. And of course, also to thank my colleagues, the team, Melina, Roman, Maria, and Marion, and of course to thank you for your attention, for your engagement in our project of creating a climate neutral Europe in 2050, despite these difficult circumstances that we have this year. So hope to see you again next year, and stay safe.